Okay, welcome everybody. Tamse Tauya Nito Tamtik, Amusin, Amaskano Anotes, Raylene Whitford Ninsigaso. My name is Raylene Whitford and I am the co-founder of INDIGI-X. Chris Karamia Inslee and I warmly welcome you to the final presentation of our second INDIGI-X cohort. I am joining you from the traditional unceded territory of Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples, now commonly known as Vancouver. And first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of our ancestors who've helped us all to be here today. In particular, I would like to express gratitude to my great-grandfather, Raymond Whitford, whom I was named after, but who I never had the opportunity to meet. He spent most of his life living in the bush in a 2-room cabin with his large family near Lac La Biche. I have no doubt that he would be over the moon to know that less than 40 years later, his granddaughter would be chairing a meeting of Indigenous leaders from all corners of the world from an apartment on the 27th floor of a high-rise in downtown Vancouver. I know very few things about my grandfather as he passed away before I was born, but what I do know is that he would be proud and perhaps slightly frightened by his independent, headstrong, and hardworking family who have devoted their life to effecting real change for our people. So every time I see or sight the pair of bald eagles from my window here, I ask them to send my deepest thanks to the creator for guiding this program and for providing me personally with a network of inspiring and resilient Indigenous peers. In the planning of this event, it's been a long time coming, and I realize that many of us have Zoom fatigue. And I recognize that a number of you are joining us from home offices, corporate offices, kitchen tables, cars, who knows. I think we've all suffered from isolation and we've all savored the rare pleasures of human connection during this incredibly challenging time. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of INDIGI-X alumni, our global network of Indigenous professionals, government, industry, our family and friends for joining us here today. I'd like to begin today by inviting three of our elders, to say an opening prayer for the session. We're so grateful to have Joshua Tuere, Elder Dr. Kennedy from New Zealand, and Knowledge Keeper Bob Silverthorne from Musqueam, Canada with us to help us open this program in a good way. So with that, I'd like to invite Joshua to start us off with an opening prayer.
Bulabinak and Kiora from the Fiji Commission in Wellington, especially to Nicholas and my diplomatic colleagues at the Canadian High Commission. Just a short masu just to start us off today. Kimami Vibusombu Matawani Nimikolo and Matanikua, Batambori Kinaturan and Ami Vital Noa and Matanikua to Kiraturam Muni Lute Kimami Kina, Thingu Kimami, Wandi Takimami, Mera Kuni Kimami Dobata, and Adamuni, Mera Kinaturam Kimami. Wadambora ka vitala takana ka emana wikinan era kini turang ne paroro tegine tam na tai kisu ne misor kani wa mbundondonga amen.
Thank you, Joshua. Next, I'd like to invite Elder Dr. Kennedy, who's been a long-standing, unwavering supporter of INDIGI-X, to help us open in a good way.
Tēnā koutou katoa, kei noi tātou. Mai te tupua, mai te tapito, mai te kauiaraki, mai tā pipiki kātua. Arise, deities. Arise, learned ones. Arise, lordly assemblages. Arise, and a link and tie the link to the gods of the indigenous people of Kanata, to the people of Fiji, and to the Māori gods of the iwi Taketake, the tangata whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Oi tēnā te Māori. Te Māori tātaka iho tā rewa tapu I o macho te kore noho mai nana te hau te rangi. I tēnā te Māori. Te Māori ka taukirunga te Māori. Te Māori ka taukirunga papatua nuku e takoto nei. I tēnā te Māori. Te Māori ka taukirunga te mananga I tau nei. Uhi, wero, hau mai te Māori. Hau mie hui e tae ki e. Oi, ka tākina te Māori, ka te Māori ahua noa ki runga ki e nei tauira, ki runga ki e nei tauira. Kia tau te Māori ki runga I tēnei tohunga he tukuna no te whai ororo o tāna te waiora. Tēnei te patatau kai, whakatū tārawa ki te rangi. Uhi, wero, hau mai te Māori, hau mie hui e tae ki e. Let the Māori, the life force be recited. The life force to be imbued upon these learners, upon these students. May the life force be infused upon these participants. The outcome of the primal efforts of Tāne Te Waiora. May understanding rise and be linked to the heavens. Uhi, wero, hau mai te Māori, hau mea hui e, tae ki e. Oi, ka tākina te kawa, nui ka te kawa, roa ka te kawa, whakatike ko te kawa I ahua mai no tiki o te rang. Tupu ko te pū, ko te wū, ko te ritu, ko te take, ko te wūkeng, ko te wānanga, ko te taura, ko te tauira. Tēnei rā te āwhinuku, te āwhiraki, no te oro, no I o macho te kore. Pua ia I te take I ue nuku, I ue rangi ka hahau ki runga ki te tūpua, ki runga ki te tawhito. Ki runga ki te kāwea nāreki, kia pute nei tauira ki te whai ao, ki te ao mālama. Tēnei te matatau kai, whakatau tārawa ki te rangi. Uhi, wero, hau mai Māori, hau mea hui e, tae ki e. Let the Karakia be recited. The great kawa, the long kawa, the kawa of immense height that was developed in Tiki o te rangi. From there grew the root, the rootlet, the shoot, the base, the skill, the inquiry, the learners, the students. Herein lies the links between earth and heaven, from the makings of Io Macho Te Kore, who caused both earth and heaven, and bestowed this on our deities, on our learned ones, and the assemblages of lauded ones. May these students emerge from the gloomy light into the light of day. May understanding rise and be linked to the heavens. Ui.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. And last but not least, I would love to invite Knowledge Keeper Bob Silverthorne, who's based in Musqueam, Canada, to open our session in a good way as well.
Nito Temtek, Kakio Wasagam Ski, to our friends all the way around this earth, this land. It's an honor to come together to bring great minds and great ways. And it's important, more important, to always open our circle of learning and knowledge and sharing with all and with ceremony, culture, language, and tradition. I use this eagle feather to make those requests today. Some words to share before I have others to share. So it's important that today marks a marvelous coming together of good minds, good thinking, and good preparation. The winds of change are not on the evening news. The winds of change are always with the people, and the Creator has given us the mind to think of that. And so it's an honor to be a small part of this, requesting on behalf of the Plains Cree people and the Plains people of the Sundance culture. I open a ceremony, I open with sweetgrass and from a sacred fire. This is the special time of Amiskwaskaiganak in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, the big beaver, big house trade area. And it's the people of the Cree and the Saulteaux and the Blackfoot and the Sarcee and the Nakota, the Saulteaux and Mi'kmaq here. And of course, the Métis people. Exciting time this in our marked our world of 4 seasons. March, it's called in English, but in Cree we call it Nipskipipisim, the moon when the geese return to the land. And I think it's so importantly, we know a bit about March. We always know that it's easterly winds here in Canada, and it's Chinook winds that bring warm weather, and we know that it's the end of Pipon, the winter, and we look onto the land, and the snow that protected Mother Earth is wrinkled and has done her job, and by melting into the earth has provided new life. The promise of spring, the promise of winter is the promise of new life in the spring. The snow returns away from the land back to the earth, and we think it's so important. The winds of March are really important. So Niskipipisim, when the geese return, the winds change, but they only change with real effort and beliefs on our behalf. And so, Nanana Skumtan, Kakio, all of you that have come together here today, and in the way of thinking, the good thinking that a Creator has made possible for us for our old traditions. Winter is over. We stop telling the winter stories. We stop telling the Witsakisak stories, but we still share the land stories and the birds and the animals and the growth and the planning and governance. That's the important part, the positive changes. So if you'll let me, I want to give deep thanks at this time of year for our leadership, Chris and Raylene and Dr. Kennedy, all those that have participated in and have made this possible. So this is the time when spring comes, we're joyous, the new winds come and they give direction, but they only give direction with each of us doing our part. Not on the weather forecast tonight, those winds of change, it's each of you, each of us that can contribute to that good thinking. So if you'll give me that moment, I'll share with you, and both in Cree and English. Anoktawinan, Aik Samanto, Samanto Gusen, Nanana Skumtananots, our Creator of all the things on this earth, of the BAC suck dolls that fly in the air, and Mina Ganuso, all that swim under the sea. And winter is gone when we could walk on the waters where no man had ever walked. Hard for those in our other parts of our land in Fiji to understand that, but at 40 below, we could walk where no man had ever walked on this earth before, over those that swim in the sea, in the waters, the birds in the air above us. So we give that deep thanks. Help us to keep going. Akamemo, never give up. Akamemo, keep going, keep thinking. Use our minds that the Creator has given us. The difference between the two-legged and the four-legged are many on this earth, but we give that deepest thanks to give us a direction. Mina kakio, all of us, a pimote, may we walk, a miwasin a meskano, may we walk in that good road that you've laid for us. Mina wapamun, look ahead, see what's ahead, use all your skills, your knowledge to do that. So, nananaskumtan kakio, mina our our leadership, our individuals in our circle as we're tightly packed together, circling this earth. Nanana skumtana notes. Mina akakio pimokteo milsa meskano. Exanma.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to all of our elders for helping us open in a really good way. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get into our two ministerial statements. So just a bit of background, because I realize we have so many new faces, which is so great to see. So INDIGI-X was created by Chris Karamia Inslee and I last year, and it was created to facilitate the transfer of knowledge, building professional networks, and support the development of commerce, international commerce for Indigenous people around the world. A very real byproduct of this program has been the development of so many deep friendships that just traverse borders, traverse continents, and have resulted in the transfer of culture and quite simply a renewed belief in the resiliency of all Indigenous people, and especially those who have been involved in the program. Our first virtual exchange was held in June and July of last year. It was very quickly pieced together by Chris and I, but it was met with such a resounding success. I admit that it surprised all of us. So once the dust settled from our first exchange, Chris and I devoted countless hours in piecing together and refining this program in order to trace a path for it to grow in an organic, meaningful, but also measured way. So this is the final presentations of our second cohort. We have another 22 amazing Indigenous professionals from Aotearoa, Canada, and Viti in the program. Our new cohort spans 2 hemispheres, 7 time zones, 3 countries. At one point, we noted that there was a difference of more than 50 degrees centigrade between where we were dialing in from. All of our delegates have agreed to participate in the program in their own free time between their work and their family commitments. And I think that you very soon will see the amazing things that have come out of it. We have entrepreneurs, lawyers, a lot of accountants, which I love, engineers, academics, an adjudicator. We have the owner of an Indigenous radio station, a tattoo shop, a forestry development officer. A quick summary of all the backgrounds of our delegates here today just won't do it justice. So I really encourage you to take a look at our welcome handbook available on the INDIGI-X website and learn more about our delegates, because they are just simply outstanding. I'm so incredibly proud of the cohort, what they've done to get where they are today, and what they've contributed through working in their groups. And I think what's underlined this 6-week program, which originally was 4 weeks, we decided to extend it by 2 weeks, but still 6 weeks is not enough. The one thing that is underlined by this program is just how much we have in common, how much opportunity there is for Indigenous people to engage in international trade, and how important relationships are in terms of building capacity, learning, and drawing strength and solidarity in what we do as Indigenous professionals. So with that, I would like to just cover some house rules. I'm sure everybody has heard this a million times. You're encouraged to stay on mute during the presentations. As this is an Indigenous-led program, we always engage with respect and reciprocity. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded and be posted on YouTube, I encourage you to leave your video off. We're going to have 4 presentations on 4 very different subjects. 2 of them are videos, just because we have delegates who are in line for their vaccination, for example, and have other work commitments. So I encourage you to save your questions until the end of each presentation and type your questions in the chat, and that's how we'll moderate those. Other than that, have fun. So please support our delegates, look them up on LinkedIn, and sign up to our mailing list on our website to hear more about the events that we're going to run. So with that, we have two statements from the government. Unfortunately, the Minister Nanaia Mahuta was an outstanding supporter of INDIGI-X in our first cohort, but she's obviously very, very busy, so she wasn't able to join us today. As well, Minister Bennett sends her regards. It's a busy month, and I think the end of the fiscal year in Canada is just adding pressure to the workload. But we do have two very amazing, supportive bureaucrats, and I say that with the nicest, with the kindest feelings in my heart. The first is Chris Moran, who has just been an incredible source of strength for me personally in running this program. She's helped us navigate the intricacies of the Canadian federal government. So I would warmly invite Chris to say a few words to welcome our delegates today.
Thank you so much, Raylene. I was very moved by the blessings at the beginning, and it resonated so much with me because I've learned so much with you through INDIGI-X and just the conversations that we've had. As you mentioned, my name is Chris Moran, and I am the Director General of the Trade and Portfolio Strategy and Coordination Bureau at Global Affairs Canada. I'm based in Ottawa, Canada, and I would like to acknowledge that Ottawa has been built on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And that is something that I take very seriously. Each time I say those words, it hits me what that means. So I say that with humility, especially before a group of Indigenous people. Again, I want to thank you, Raylene, for everything that you've taught me over the years, I guess I should say. I had the pleasure of joining your first cohort last June, and you and I have had several conversations since, and I am honored to be invited back. And I also would like to thank you for including the TCS in your learning journey. As you know, the Government of Canada is pursuing a more inclusive approach to trade that is looking to ensure that the benefits of trade are more widely shared, including by Indigenous businesses. And this requires us to address some gaps, and there are serious gaps. It requires us to have a reckoning with reality. Who are we not serving? And more importantly, why? It's my great honor to have been asked to lead the team responsible for that. And I take that as a serious responsibility, but I also see it as an opportunity. And as an individual and a Canadian, I see that responsibility as a gift, and I cherish it. It has led me on a path of enlightenment. It has opened my eyes to a lot of serious issues in my country that I was only partially aware of. And I feel that to be able to support something like this is so important. It contributes to so much in the economic development space. We know in the Trade Commissioner Service, which has offices across the globe, that businesses require people-to-people relationships. And I've learned so much from Raylene over the past few months of the Indigenous way of doing business. And I think it's really important learning for us to take into the Trade Commissioner Service. We need to have that conversation with reality. We need to recognize the challenges and barriers that are facing our Indigenous entrepreneurs. And we need to take that learning and bring it back and address those gaps. So I would like to say that the Trade Commissioner Service has offices in every single province. We are there to serve Canadian exporters. We have trade commissioners who are also based in Auckland and Wellington who want to work with everybody who is participating in INDIGI-X. We're here to work with you and we're here to serve you. And we appreciate very much being included in this learning. We very much are inspired by the types of conversations that you're having and the creative opportunity. And I just want to say thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you, Chris. As you can see, we have so many wonderful supporters of the program. Last but not least, I'd like to invite Director General Francois Weldon from CERNAC. It's my understanding, Francois, we've never met on Zoom, but it's my understanding that you've really been a strong supporter of our program as well. So welcome to our network.
you very much, Raylene. I appreciate the welcome. So let me just begin quickly. Unukut, Tansi, hello, and to all. I want to acknowledge, like Chris did, that I join you from my home here in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and that we all are joining this gathering from the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples from all of our countries. Like Chris, I don't make that acknowledgement lightly. I've been in the role that I am in within Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, or its predecessor departments, for roughly 6 years now. And as the Director General responsible for Indigenous and External Relations, and something that was entirely new to me when I took this role. I have learned what can only be described as an encyclopedic volume of knowledge that has been immensely valuable to me, not only in the job that I do, but in the life that I lead and the relationships that I have forged with people. But certainly in the job that I do, it allows me to perform my duties and to support activities like this one in a way that is respectful and far more constructive than ways I might have approached the duties that I assume now in the past. I also want to thank the three elders, Joshua Tuere, Dr. Kennedy, and Bob Silverthorne, for their opening words and prayers, and for getting this gathering off in a good way. That's always an important start to a meeting, and I appreciated and took to heart what was expressed by all three. So it's my pleasure and a true privilege to be here today and to speak to you on behalf of Minister Bennett. I want to extend a special greeting as well to participants from New Zealand on behalf of Minister Bennett, and to salute and welcome the Itakeu and Rotuman delegates from Fiji to the exchange. It's my pleasure to be here with my colleague, Chris Moran, and all here who I'm sure, like me, are keenly interested in hearing the findings of the work of your program for the last 6 weeks. Let me just begin by noting as well that Canada is firmly committed, strongly committed to cooperating with New Zealand on Indigenous issues. I mean, we have been partners bilaterally, but also in multilateral fora for years, and very strong partners in that. And we're also very strong supporters of New Zealand in the role that it's going to be assuming as a host of the Asia-Pacific Cooperation Summit, particularly in its role in championing Indigenous issues, Indigenous matters as central themes to this year's summit. I'd like to acknowledge you, Raylene, and your partner, Chris Inslee, for the work that you've done. You're truly visionary and successfully created this first of its kind event that continues to foster partnerships among Indigenous professionals and the dynamic partnerships across and among our countries. And I do want to thank you personally as well, Raylene, for the letter that you sent to my deputy this morning. That's something that I think the work of some of the members of my team, and Marco in particular, and I know he's on the call today, and I haven't had an opportunity to reach out to him today to congratulate him for your thanks. And I think it is very gracious of you to have extended that thank you to my deputy minister. So as young professionals in the business and corporate worlds, I mean, you bring new perspectives and new ways of doing things. And I know that you have many of the same aspirations, including having an ability to determine your own paths forward. I'm also sensitive to the fact that in many cases you share very similar historical paths, including the effects of colonization and the injustices over centuries that have come with that colonization. I mean, in Canada, we're working hard to advance reconciliation with First Nations, with Inuit, and with Métis peoples in order to build a better country. We recognize that Indigenous peoples in Canada face systemic discrimination in the form of racism from government institutions, Working towards ending systemic racism is about recognizing that the systems we've built over the past generations have not treated people well or fairly. The Government of Canada is committed to addressing this systemic racism and to ensure Canadians can have faith, all Canadians can have faith in their government institutions, and to learn from the wisdom of our partners in the way that respect our shared priorities and eliminates systemic racism. Self-determination, which is really the objective of this government, is about culture, it's about language, it's about land, it's about social fabric and health. But those are only part of the equation. I mean, you also have to very much have the levers to create your own prosperity, and that's, I think, very much of what you've been focusing on. The government's been clear in its commitment to advancing self-determination of Indigenous communities. We're doing so by working with Indigenous partners to build strong institutions, facilitate access to capital, supporting local revenue generation, and putting control of land resources and financial management in the hands of communities. I know none of this can come fast enough, but that is what we are working on. We're also collaborating with Indigenous business, financial organizations, First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities to ensure that they have adequate, sustainable community infrastructure, and in fact, to be able to make good on those aspirations. This is all about equality of life and economic opportunity, and striking the relationship that we should have always had with Indigenous people in Canada. So renewing that relationship with Indigenous peoples and organizations is a central goal of the Government of Canada, and we're here to try and set to lay the foundations for that. So I look forward to the rest of this conversation. I unfortunately will not be able to stay for all of it, but I am happy to know that we do have some people who are on the line from my team who will be able to report back to me and to our deputy and to our minister about the work that you've all been doing. And I'm glad you are recording because we can encourage people to actually take stock of this firsthand. So thank you very much for having me here today. It's, as I said at the very beginning, it is a pleasure and an absolute privilege. So miigwech, kuyanamik, thank you, merci, merci.
Thank you, Francois. And I just do want to do a quick shout out to Marco de Guzman, Khalil Cappuccino, Joseph Odiambo, and Blandine Africot, who have also strongly supported us. I saw Ian Wood pop up from the New Zealand High Commission, and I know that the Canadian High Commission in Auckland has a room of 15 people apparently. So welcome to everybody. Okay, we have a lot to get through today. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first group, Group 1, looking at the topic of Indigenous Economic Revitalization. We did not discuss if you were going to introduce your video. I don't know, Denise or Ula, if you want to say anything before I start it, you're more than welcome to.
Sure, I can do that. Hadi, my name is Denise Halfyard. I'm part of Group 1 with Patricia from Saskatchewan, Joe from Alberta, originally from New Zealand, Koila, Moira, and Ula, who created our video for us, unfortunately can't log in right now. They are from Fiji, and Tatiana from New Zealand. And we did a video presentation on Indigenous Economic Revitalization. I hope you enjoy.
Indigenous Economic Revitalization. What does this mean? Breaking it down, Indigenous. Originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Economic, in relation to trade, industry, and the creation of wealth. Revitalization, the action of infusing something with life and vitality. This presentation shows how we as Indigenous people are learning from the past, celebrating our present-day success, and planning for the future. Throughout the last year, many Indigenous people use their inability to gather, to get back to their roots, reconnect with the land and their culture. Entrepreneurs were creating businesses from their skills, learned through tradition, incorporating their stories and history into their work. The established businesses pivoted, some with the ability to keep their staff by using their Indigenous values. As we slowly emerge and open up our economies, we look to a future where we own our independence and start building our economic wealth through equity and entrepreneurial sustenance.
Tanzi, Bulawunaka, Kia ora, and Talofa. My name's Joseph Alain Moana, and with our team on economic revitalization, my presentation will be on First Nation equity and participation. The three words that I felt was important was First Nation wealth, independence, and livelihood. For First Nation wealth, building First Nation communities' independent capacities, for example, economic, business, and cultural. Some of these examples we have seen recently has been a group of First Nation communities called Natural Law on the TC Energy Keystone XL project, the Fort Nelson First Nations on their Clark Geothermal project, the Micmac First Nation Coalition and Premium Brands jointly purchasing Clearwater Seafoods. Independence, it is good to see that First Nations are not solely reliant on outside funding, but creating its own source revenue. Livelihood, with seeing increased First Nations participation in major projects, equity opportunities, First Nation members are starting up their own businesses. First Nations are also providing more employment opportunities that are skilled and trade, not just with the labor. These opportunities are available for First Nation members. Instead of employment and contracting opportunities leaving the communities, businesses, First Nation band members are able to participate in this process. Some of the programs that we see that are available in assisting First Nation communities in creating long-term opportunities are, for example, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, the 3.2 Federal Government Tree Planting Program Initiative, and then also the Provincial Abandonment Program that they have in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. I've also asked some former colleagues in regards to three words that mean important to them in regards to First Nation equity and participation. Whawhitai lava.
Hi, my name is Joe Bevan, a former chief of the Kitsillas First Nation. Kitsillas First Nation is part of the Tsimshian Nation up on the northwest coast of BC. I was asked to provide a few words on what equity means to the nation as well as myself. When I first hear of equity, I think of ownership or seat at the table. I'd say the second word would be return on investment. And I guess the next word would be greater value. So that's what equity means to the Kitsillas First Nation, and wanted to thank you for your time.
In our community is we have a 4-pillar system that we developed when I was the chief. Those 4 pillars are education and training, language and culture, health and wellness, and housing. Those are the 4 priority areas that we see that are needs within our community, and we want to be able to provide good programs and services for our people and build capacity. We want a better quality of life, and that's what Indigenous equity ownership means to me. Misai.
Hi, my name is Barry Nicole. My hereditary name is Beanie. I'm from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I live in Wet'suwet'en First Nation, formerly known as the Morrison Indian Band. What Indigenous equity in business and project means to me is we can proactively exercise our Indigenous rights. We now participate to protect our environmental interests, and we now generate our own source of revenue to provide improved socioeconomics such as healthcare and education for our community, our members, and across our nation.
My name is Patricia Crow, and I am a Métis woman that was born in the northern village of Isle-la-Crosse, Saskatchewan. Isle-la-Crosse was home of one of Canada's first historic trading posts, thus creating one of the first economic business hubs in Saskatchewan. Métis people were fur traders, fishermen, hunters, trappers, harvesters, and many still continue to live off of the land and waters today. Métis people spoke Michif, a combination of Cree and French, and we all continue to live Kitapimsano, the ability to take care of ourselves, to own ourselves, to provide for ourselves and our families. With self-determination and hard work, we raised our families and we expanded our skill sets to include artistry and creativity, like building the Red River cart, moccasin making, beadwork, craftspeople that reflect our distinct culture and identity. Our history also reflects our defiance, our ability to challenge, to resist, and to fight, whether it be for our identity, for our recognition, or for our people. Today, we have taken a page from our history books and created an ecosystem of capital, training, networking, culture, and economic climate that supports the Métis entrepreneur. Saskatchewan is home to one of 5 Métis capital corporations of Canada. Sask Métis Economic Development Corporation is available for financing. Gabriel Dumont Institute has created a training program, Pathways for Entrepreneurs, along with community partnerships that build on our culture, our identity, and networking and support for one another. Métis have their own business development corporations, educational institutions, housing corporations, and are strong contributors to the future of Indigenous revitalization. There is still infrastructure to be built. However, our past ways of doing and being, combined with our knowledge and wisdom, will ensure Métis people will continue to not only survive, but to thrive and to share our successes through self-determination, defiance, and independence. Thank you. Hi, hi.
Indigenous people were working together and doing business, trading with one another long before there was even a word for it. Their lives were built on principles of teamwork and structure, working together as a family or community. If you couldn't work through a challenge, there was someone there to help you, someone to teach you, someone to guide you. This last year saw many communities turn to the internet to keep us connected. Entrepreneurs who relied on in-person events all of a sudden needed to bring their businesses online. In Canada, Indigenous women entrepreneurs had a wonderful resource, the Indigenous Lift Collective, an online gathering where one could find help and resources to grow their business. Through the Indigenous Lift Collective, businesses have been amplified and grown. Lessons have been learned and friendships have been formed. New business ideas have come to fruition and successes have been shared and celebrated. Through necessity, we saw an increase in Fijian entrepreneurs in the last year, which is wonderful because within their own country, they were never seen as ones who could succeed in business. It has been voiced that they would love access to a collective of entrepreneurs, such as the Indigenous Lift Collective, for guidance and support, especially as a business startup. Therefore, an international Indigenous business collective could greatly benefit many Indigenous entrepreneurs around the world, regardless of gender. A place where entrepreneurs can seek advice and celebrate their victories within a community of supportive colleagues.
Māori success in the tourism industry reaches back to the origins of tourism in Aotearoa. Tourists have been drawn to the beautiful and dramatic landscape as well as the Māori culture, which is entwined with the whenua. Indigenous values of manaakitanga and kaitiakitanga have seen an obvious alignment between Māori and tourism that has resulted in tourism being a critical industry in the Māori economy. So when COVID-19 stopped international arrivals, the effect on tourism and Māori has been devastating. Some operators have decided to close their doors and let their staff go until there is a clear timeline on when international visitors will return. Some tourism operators, however, have shown great resilience, pivoting and diversifying in order to stay operational and retain their people. I want to highlight one such Māori tourism operator that responded to COVID-19 by drawing closely to their values as Māori. NDA Experiences is a Māori-owned business that offers luxury tours, educational tours, and are heavily involved in mountain biking, a popular attraction activity in the Rotorua area. They saw their tour numbers go from 423 in 2019 to just 3 in the last year. Here is co-owner Takurua Mutu in 2014 explaining the values of NDA Experiences.
We've got a little saying that we have in our culture. It goes like this: he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And what does that mean? That means what is the most important thing in the world? The people, the people, the people.
In response to COVID-19 and holding true to their Indigenous values, NDA Experiences removed their profit KPIs and instead focused on retaining and developing their staff, as well as modernising their fleet to be more environmentally friendly. In fact, staff remuneration, excluding senior management, has increased by 10% over the last 6 months. They've taken this opportunity to test new offerings on the tourism domestic market and strengthen their online presence so that when international borders reopen, they can respond strongly in a way that is more sustainable. And there are many examples of Māori businesses doing the same. Yet the discourse around the economic revitalisation of the tourism industry tends to list Māori culture as an aspect rather than a foundation and a lens over which the sustainability of the industry could be realised. The vision of a tourism industry that fully aligns with Māori values is the core of revitalising the industry. This requires wider acceptance and appreciation of the mātauranga that Indigenous and Māori have.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Moira Salvolo from the fashion label 8 Mountains.
What inspired you to start 8 Mountains?
Watching my mom at a very tender age sew and make clothes for other women, it brought happiness to them. And I wanted to be a part of an industry where women found their form of expression through fashion.
Can you state 2 challenges as an entrepreneur that you feel are important to share?
Yes, one of my challenges was to believe in myself and see my worth in the industry. I really had to believe in myself to take my label to where it is right now. And the second one is the fashion industry contributes heavily to pollution, and at 8 Mountains we believe in ethical and sustainable production. That's why we have gone into making products that are reusable, like the pads and the diapers as well as masks, because we want to engage our buyers and also our communities into thinking about an eco-friendly planet.
Do you have any advice for women and girls who would like to follow in your footsteps?
Don't tuck your dream away. If you have a dream, believe in yourself and look at options. Today it's very easy to find various options to become an entrepreneur and to find inspiration in other entrepreneurs as well around us, so we need to engage that.
Thank you, Moira.
Cultural heritage as the House of Koila brand, we are in the planning stages of hosting a first of its kind in Fiji, a Custodians Expo. We are all custodians of our heritage, our cultural values, beliefs, and identity. The Custodians Expo is to make people have a bigger appreciation for culture that is value-driven, authentic, inclusive, and transparent. One that cares for the people and the planet more. a culture that puts the health of our ecosystem at the heart of our business system. That means design systems and structures from a humanitarian community-centered perspective rather than one that is profit-centered. This pandemic should make most realize the importance of finding value in human connection more than ever. The Custodian Expo will be a 3-day event showcasing the lost identity of culture and traditions using local resources post-COVID. 3 days of art, dance, food, fashion, literature. This year's event brings a first-of-its-kind insight to a range of rare artisans, practitioners of lost crafts, authentic dance, and food preparations and storytelling of one of the 3 confederacies that govern the Indigenous Itoke people. This expo will provide the platform for more learning opportunities through seminars, workshops, as well as competitions based on the skill sets of our local Itoke. This is going to be a yearly event that will promote, preserve, and teach our cultural heritage for future generations and create more business opportunities and the power to shape the future.
Promote awareness that there are programs and support from the provincial and federal government to assist First Nations communities to achieve long-term equity opportunities in all industries that will benefit Indigenous people beyond 7 generations. Then share the blueprint of these government programs to be implemented for our family in Fiji and New Zealand. Invest in an online platform Indigenous entrepreneurs around the world can access for advice, learning, and support, further expanding their global influence. Recognizing the vital strength of Indigenous values that have connected our past, present, and lead us into the future, establish a tourism task force led by Maori and Indigenous peoples, with the mandate to develop frameworks that incentivizes businesses that operate in adherence with Indigenous values and implement a similar force across all industries to lead our economic revitalization. Call for a national roundtable on Indigenous Economic Revitalization, inclusive of a distinct Métis voice and 3 ex officio seats for Indigi-X cohort alumni. Create an Indigenous business directory, bridging support from Indigi-X and the local Indigenous Business Council, registering Indigenous businesses from various industries, connecting them directly to buyers from around the world who are looking for products and services made and supplied by Indigenous people.
Thank you, Group 1. I don't know if you just want to close that, Patricia, for your group.
Good. Thank you, Raylene. This was such an exciting project. And when we looked at our ancestors and those that walked before us, we wanted to draw who we are as Indigenous people. And so we looked in terms of the present circumstances with COVID, and we looked towards the strengths that we have as Indigenous people. So we chose 3 words that reflected our history, our cultures, who we are, and why you would want to invest, whether it be with industry, within equity, or supporting Indigenous entrepreneurs. We felt that as Indigenous people that we carry the strengths, carry the culture, and that we could bring this into our business life. You don't have to separate who you are. And we drew from the strengths of who we are, from our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors, and we feel strongly that as Indigenous people that we will be part of the economic revitalization once we're all done with COVID. Thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Group 1. So apologies for the technical difficulties. I'm an accountant. I'm not so good with the computers, but we will be posting that on our YouTube channel. And just a really, really big thank you to Group 1. Group 1 was our largest group. There were 7 delegates from all of the different countries. And what they wanted to do was just highlight stories of resilience and growth, even during a difficult period such as COVID. So I would like to start with asking a question. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions for yourselves. It would be really great to just have 1 or 2 examples of really tangible things that helped you or one of your group members during the last 12 months in light of COVID to grow your business or to continue to be resilient. I don't know if you have any examples that you can share with us.
I don't know if is Moira on the line? I apologize.
She is.
Hi. Yes, I can answer that for you. As a fashion label, we decided to diversify and went into making reusable masks and reusable diapers as well as pads. And that has taken our business in a different direction because during post-COVID, pre-COVID, we were making a lot of money through fashion, but that went really quiet because our online business was really slowing down during COVID. And we managed to diversify and make money through that. So yeah, that has been our strength so far. Being able to find something that our grandmothers taught us and continue to bring that to our current business strategy now.
Thanks, Moira. Yes, I love the fact that we can go from, stories of success and pivoting in tourism to pivoting and producing reusable menstrual pads, which I don't think is talked enough about in our society. And then I think that we can go to slightly bigger scale projects. So I don't know if Joseph is still on the call, but Joseph, it'd be great for you to share just even one story of a community that you worked with or that you're living in and their success in terms of negotiating equity stakes in major projects.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So Joseph Lemwana, I work as a business development on behalf of various First Nations in Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. I am a New Zealand born from Wellington, New Zealand, but I've been in Canada for 20 years. I guess this week, one of the stories is, we used it as an example. Unfortunately, you didn't see the slide. Right now, there is a federal program on a $3.2 billion tree planting initiative that's out here right now. So with one of the communities, Carry the Kettle First Nations, we had acquired a PFRA, which is a nursery, 3 years ago. So with this program, we've been working with the federal government, the provincial government, on finding ways that we can access different funding opportunities. The exciting part of this is it's not oil and gas. It's it's the opportunity for. I'm not too sure. We tried to have a look at. There's not a lot of nurseries that are owned by First Nation communities, so we have a pretty state-of-the-art facility that, when we were talking with our community and we're talking with our elders, is now we're able to take a facility that we've had, during the COVID and revitalize it. So now we're looking at the opportunity of now becoming a grower of seedlings. We're looking at potentially the idea of growing and then also planting all the trees. So we are looking at different types of trees. Currently we have 750,000 trees, but the exciting part for the nursery is now it creates a different, it's a different way of generating revenue for the community. And we are looking at employment opportunities. We're turning the nursery into a area where we would be able to mentor a lot of our elders, mentor a lot of our younger generation. And we're pretty excited. It's definitely, it's not your typical oil and gas. It's working with green energy. It allows us to be able to take control. We do have exit plans where the nation will be able to manage the facility 100%. So we are pretty excited with that. And, you know, stay tuned. We do have other initiatives that we have coming out in regards to equity and ownership for First Nations.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. I'm just mindful of the time and mindful that some of you may have missed parts of the presentation. So I think let's just leave group one there. I think they've set a really good scene for the rest of our program. I would like to invite group two now to present on building up and looking out capacity building for Indigenous Climate Futures. So in group two, we have Taylor Foa, Nikki Douglas, Leighton Gall, Miles Joliffe, and Patricia Sayer. Go ahead, group two.
Okay, thanks, Raylene. I just shared my screen. Can everybody see that?
We can.
Perfect. Okay, well, just first of all, I wanted to thank you, Raylene and Chris, for starting INDIGI-X and getting us all together. It's been an amazing experience. I'm Patricia with Group 2, talking about building capacity looking out. Our group mates are Patricia, Leighton, Miles from Canada, Taylor, and Nikki from New Zealand. We also just want to take a quick moment to thank the elders for starting us off with our traditional knowledges and starting us off in a good way, and also provide the land acknowledgement for us in Canada. We're here on the West Coast, so we are on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. And Taylor and Nikki are in traditional Maori lands. So we are talking about climate change as a global crisis, as everyone knows, and in particular is a threat to Indigenous peoples who are broadly connected to their respective natural environments, the impact of which will be felt in cultural, social, environmental, and economic ways. The ability for Indigenous peoples to meet this threat lies in their adaptive capacity. If we frame the climate change crisis as the persistence of colonialism, then exposure is the contact between Indigenous communities and their respective colonial systems for over 200 years. Sensitivity would then be the resulting effects of that system and can include underfunding of infrastructure and education, attempted destruction of cultural, social, and community fabrics, and the removal of stewardship rights and responsibilities over traditional land, territories, and resources. The outcome is the adaptive capacity of Indigenous communities has been eroded. Where the exposure to climate risk is high and the adaptive capacity is low, the result is Indigenous communities are more vulnerable and will face climate change effects of a higher magnitude of order than non-Indigenous citizens. Adaptive capacity is a function of access to technical, financial, educational, and community resources. And we have identified 3 functional areas where if the deficit were addressed in a meaningful way, the increase in adaptive capacity would allow Indigenous communities that ability to develop resilience and adjust to the climate risks as self-determining peoples. These 3 spheres include being at the decision-making table, community adaptation, and through energy opportunities. My teammate Nikki will take you through the first sphere.
Kia ora tātou. I'm Nikki Douglas from Te Arawa Waka Ngāti Porou in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you, Patricia. So in the Voice at the Table sphere, I've been looking at forums in the international, national, and regional provincial settings. And I'm reminded that there are many tables and the voice of Indigenous people needs to be at all of them, and in particular with respect to climate change. UNDRIP is the framework that we have used to highlight the essential status of Indigenous people in addressing climate change and capacity building. You will hear how we see this happening from Taylor soon. In the international space, the IPCC was created to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change, its implications and potential future risks, as well as to put forward adaptation and mitigation options. Research undertaken by James Ford and Baron Ford clearly show that in an institutional gap in the IPCC assessments. Ford et al. Argue that the voice of Indigenous people must be captured in future IPCC assessment reports, given 1, the affirmation of the importance of Indigenous knowledge by the IPC in previous reports, and 2, Indigenous populations have been identified as highly vulnerable to climate change. The IPCC is about to receive the 6th report focusing on risk assessment and adaptation responses. This will be useful insight to the key risk areas for communities in their adaptive capacity and focus our efforts on building capacity to support our vulnerable communities in meaningful ways. I am hoping the voice of Indigenous people resonates loudly in the IPCC upcoming report, and that New Zealand, Canada and Fiji examines their own contribution to ensure that this is true. Next slide, please, Patricia. Thank you. In a national context, there are already existing structural mechanisms to enable capacity building to be embedded into legislation, policy development of Indigenous-led and development of Indigenous-led initiatives. The voice is there, and we need support for this to be amplified, heard, and allowed to lead at the national level. The current proposed policy settings in New Zealand and resources allocation initiatives in Canada indicate support for vulnerable communities, investments in energy, transport sectors to both mitigate and provide for adaptation strategies. There is more needed, however, on representation and decision-making, job development, skill redeployment, financial incentives, and investment opportunities to fully enable Indigenous communities to build capacity. Patricia Miles and Leighton will cover this and demonstrate how a voice at the table can be implemented, ensuring the communities and rights afforded Indigenous peoples already are met and their contribution is enabled and acted upon to meet the needs of not only their own communities, but provides co-benefit. Next slide. There are outstanding examples of communities, Indigenous communities and collective Indigenous people taking up space left through the inaction of government and industries in the climate challenge. There are a number of community initiatives based on their seen and felt experience of climate change and biodiversity decline across our countries. It is recognised that climate change will not only have an impact on the economy, but their place and their people. These communities are not only responding, but leading for a future that can be sustained. They have an important role in shaping, creating and delivering for themselves and future generations. And many of these are built on their own narratives and traditions, their own values. They speak of resilience, partnership, deep knowledge and wisdom, and the need to unite and thrive. These are the initiatives that governments, federal, national, regional, and provincial, need to invest more in to ensure communities can meet the challenges of climate change. It is having the voices of these people at the table to ensure that these successes and models can be used to scale up more Indigenous-led responses to capacity building. Back to you, Patricia.
Thank you, Nikki. And so I'm talking about Sphere 2. Sphere 2 is looking at the local community capacity to address climate change challenges. And it's important to be able to do that at the community level because climate change is felt at the local level. And as place-based communities, Indigenous peoples are best situated to provide localized responses. The front line, Indigenous communities are at the front line of climate impacts, and without adaptive capacity, climate crisis will effectively add another layer of trauma impacts to Indigenous communities. We have inalienable human rights, as laid out in UNDRIP, rights as self-determining people, and the rights to conservation and protection of the environment. And lastly, one of the major effects of climate change is going to be a projected loss of 70% of biodiversity. Research shows that 82% of the worldwide biodiversity is contained in areas managed by Indigenous peoples, and that a 2019 IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, I have to read that off the page, I'm sorry, Raylene, it identifies that Indigenous peoples are best placed to address the biodiversity challenges going forward. So that's the why. Some of the challenges that we identified through our discussions is that Indigenous communities have to navigate a maze of different orders of government. And what this means is there's a maze of legislation, regulation, and policy that has to sort of be worked through. You know, as an example, in Canada, at the federal level, there are no less than 8 different legislations to consider when it comes to climate and environmental considerations. And that doesn't include, you know, the other orders of government like provincial, regional, or municipal. Therefore, making it a capacity challenge to effectively and efficiently implement local community adaptation strategies. There are some existing programs to help with Indigenous climate adaptation, but we think that the uptake for these are low. And another Canadian example for this is at the federal level, there's a program called First Nations Adapt. It provides federal funding for climate adaptation projects. For the fiscal year 2019-2020, only 68 projects were funded. And BC has the largest number of First Nations in Canada, 198 communities. Of that 68, only 18 of them were BC projects. So you can see that there's a really low uptake for these sorts of programs, which is an issue. And then the third area is the lack of qualified climate professionals. So through our discussions, we felt like there was, and this is part of comes back also to the decision-making table, but there's a lack of people with the right skill set to advance Indigenous-led climate initiatives. As an example, Nikki's tribal iwi recently published a climate strategy to address climate changes at their local level there. While this was done in consultation with the iwi, the work was completed by non-Maori researchers, climate scientists, and funders. The situation is similar in Canada. And then the other area that we sort of identified that supports this is, there was a recent report published by Eco Canada. This is an organization that does workforce research and training specifically for the environmental space. And they've identified in general, there'll be a shortage of environmental workers by 2029, which means in Indigenous communities, that shortage will be even more acute. So those are some of the challenges that we've identified for adaptive capacity at the local level. Next, Miles will talk about the third area of capacity.
Thanks, Patricia. Next slide, thank you. Long-term solutions. Long-term solutions to the climate issue, as well as the issues that face our Indigenous communities, will require long-term consistent government action. The climate issue is an issue of how we power our economies and our lives. The table on the left shows a breakdown of how Canada and New Zealand go about powering their economies. The total energy supply is a measure of all energy within an economy, which takes into account energy as fuel for transportation. What I wanted to draw the attention to is still the high levels of CO2 emission associated with energy production. 75% in Canada has a CO2 footprint, and still 58% in New Zealand has a carbon footprint when you take into account transportation. This is just highlighting the fact that tremendous amount of investment is going to need to go into replace this existing infrastructure. Within that context, we know that governments are taking action. We might not all agree that it's the right action or at the right pace or at the right scale, but I think we can all agree that governments are taking action. And I think that we can both agree that both the government of Canada and New Zealand, where our members are from in this group, nobody was from Fiji, would also agree that both governments are committed to the principles of UNDRIP, and that the projects going forward will be viewed through that lens. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to talk about, or at least what I wanted to talk about in terms of the long-term opportunity, and it's great that the other group touched on it, is really the alignment of government action with Indigenous equity ownership. And we're framing it, I guess, within the climate change lens and as it relates to spending on infrastructure and its associated infrastructure. And specifically what we're asking the government to consider is to look at instituting policies and programs that promote the advancement of Indigenous equity ownership in new energy systems commercially. So looking to provide electricity into the grid, these types of energy projects. We're looking at the government to leverage the existing regulatory system to the benefit of Indigenous communities. Energy markets are highly regulated. This type of intervention into it would not distort it or and would lend itself very nicely to government having a say in ownership equity on infrastructure that transits through Indigenous traditional territory. I think it's important too that these types of projects, they provide a great mechanism for access to debt and capital. The existing infrastructure underwrites some of the lending, and so that even if the loan is underwritten by the government, that much of the much of the debt that's taken out is actually in the form of the infrastructure. So that it's a very unique thing, and it's something to consider for building equity within these Indigenous communities, is these special types of infrastructure investment vehicles, which are on the, the 10, 20, 30, 40-year timeframes. Next slide, please. As a mechanism, we consider, instituting, getting the governments to first just ask the question of project proponents, what is your plan for Indigenous equity ownership, similar to an environmental assessment, or it's maybe an addendum to existing Indigenous participation plans, but that it specifically addresses Indigenous equity ownership, which is in fact separate from the access and benefit agreements to any potentially affected nation. And also what I think is really unique is to recommend, putting in some teeth into this clause and set a target that's maybe a reach goal, but a goal that, should move the needle for the communities. And, within our group, we thought, 5% in Canada and 15% in New Zealand, based on, the breakdown of populations who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So just as a starting point for that discussion. I think you could make cases for maybe a little bit more in Canada, and who knows, I don't have as much expertise in New Zealand, but as a starting point for the discussion, I think most importantly, I think it's good to set a target both internally and externally to set to let people know what you're driving towards. Next slide, please. I think much of this might have been covered by the other groups, so I'd just like to highlight that we're talking about providing long-term stable revenue sources, that the communities can base long-term decision-making on and plan accordingly. They can fund their own programs. They can send their people to school. They can invest in their communities. These types of long-term revenue sources are critically important for I think addressing the social inequality. And I mentioned, that they do have unique funding mechanisms which do lend themselves to not having to put up a lot of capital to be able to access a lot of debt. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share one success case. Joe and the other group did touch on this one. This is a success case. This is called Cascade Power. This was a natural gas power plant that was built with Indigenous equity ownership in Alberta. Again, it's not quite ideal. This was a natural gas plant built to displace coal. It's still not full, obviously, green energy. But what I wanted to highlight is that there was a mechanism where the government of Alberta worked with 6 First Nations and commercial bank entities to secure $93 million within the context of a $1.5 billion project to provide a lot of electricity to the grid. And so I just think if anybody's interested, read up on that. There's some great information there by the First Nations Major Project Coalition. And just to close before I hand it off, I just wanted to touch on the quote. And ultimately, it's not about just revenue and business. It's about reinvestment in the community. And I think the chief's words are really succinct. And I think it's what I think we're all driving towards, is that self-determination and finding those mechanisms to achieve that. I'll turn it over to Leighton.
Thanks, Miles. Hi, my name is Leighton. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate strategy arbitrage. If some of our attendees here today don't know what arbitrage is, it is where we profit on the difference or provide gains by transferring one asset to another market that has differences. And so here on the right side, we have the energy sources from New Zealand, and then on the left we have Canada. So Canada right now is generating 67% of its energy from renewables, and New Zealand 40%. This is different because in electrification terms, New Zealand is far ahead in terms of providing geothermal, and so they have almost 100% of their power providing electrification. And so in terms of geothermal, we have drilling and oil field equipment here in Canada and knowledge going back and forth. And well, it's being unused right now. So that would be an example of being able to trade through those markets and provide some gains. Now, Fiji, there wasn't a whole lot of data on it, but still went down and pulled some out of it. So it's generating 296 megawatts. It's got currently 45% of its energy coming from things like diesel, adding to GHGs. And when we're doing arbitrage, we're able to find that solar panels, other little things that are working for remote communities down in the Southern Hemisphere work really well here in Canada in our own remote communities. So those ideas and those technologies, once they're proven, we are able to scale them. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is what our global network is currently. In the future, you're going to see in the upcoming IPCC 6th assessment reports, we're going to be graded on our societal choices. So if we are not collaborating and networking currently how we are today, we can't actually, the science can't solve by 2080 down to less than the 2 degrees. So we actually end up overshooting our mark by about 3 degrees. And we end up getting that biodiversity loss and then all the other chain of events that we don't want by crossing those planetary boundaries. So it goes to highlight today what we're doing is extremely important. And along with Global Affairs Canada and creating these exchanges, because our societal choices are leading to gains and arbitrage, and it's going to get us to those goals and targets that we want much quicker. Also, by doing that, I pulled our latest economic reports in New Zealand on Maori Indigenous populations, and here in Canada, there was a little bit on Fiji. And when I synthesized those numbers and brought them together, currently we're losing about $33.4 billion a year expressed in New Zealand dollars to not having our Maori and Indigenous businesses between the 3 nations operating at the level of non-Indigenous. So we need to find those efficiencies, and we can do that through global affairs and all of our Crown Indigenous relations, and just keep doing what we're doing. It's wonderful. So next slide, thanks.
Kia ora Leighton. Tēnā tātou, he mihi nui ki a koutou katoa e haere mai ana I tērā nei ki te whakamana I tēnei kaupapa nui. Ai, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Ko Taylor taku ingoa, so my name is Taylor. So just to help you understand how we've woven this together, when we looked at the overarching need for capacity building in climate space, we were drawn to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and its potential to be a method, well, an effective method actually of enhancing greater support for these gaps. So yeah, we believe that implementing UNDRIP is a crucial part of Indigenous climate action because it will provide just that higher protection and recognition of Indigenous rights to self-government and environmental management. Next slide, please, Patricia. So linking the declaration and its purpose to our 3 spheres that Patricia, Nikki, Leighton and Miles talked about, we want UNDRIP to be more than just an interpretive tool for contextualizing customary rights, but rather a real driving vehicle that will provide stronger sustenance for capacity building in the climate arena, which in essence is the foundation of our context. So it's built on the long-standing Indigenous assertion of the right to exercise self-determination to protect our lands and territories. So yeah, we've identified on this slide here some key articles that we find particularly relevant to our 3 spheres. For example, Articles 4 and 19 can build the legal framework for enhancing our voices at the decision-making tables, which Nikki spoke about earlier. Articles 25 and 29, tailored to a climate lens, can provide the grounding for adaptive capacity, in which Patricia expanded on, identifying the gaps in education, expertise and infrastructure. And Articles 4 and 9 can act as pillars in ascertaining ways for Indigenous people to have viable long-term solutions like equity, ownership of of new energy sources, which Leighton and Miles discussed. So yeah, we propose to think of these articles as the functioning wheels of our UNDRIP and climate change vehicle. Next slide, please, Patricia. Yeah, so as we know, UNDRIP hasn't been applied to national legislation yet, and this is just another reason why it's a great opportunity to raise these climate discussions here and now, because both New Zealand and Canada are currently in positions and now have the maturity to undertake transformation that can restructure governance and laws to give effect to the Indigenous peoples' rights to the environment. And we're already seeing progress in Canada's Bill C-15, which proposes to take measures to ensure that all Canadian laws are consistent and harmonised with the UNDRIP articles and to prepare an implementation plan. As well as progress in New Zealand, where the Declaration Working Group are working, well, they're already working on an action plan and are currently going through engagement processes with whānau, iwi and hapu. So just going back, I suppose, to our kaupapa or our principles, we've identified a lot of gaps in the climate space where Indigenous peoples are struggling to exercise their autonomy at decision-making levels. They're finding it hard to transition to adaptation needs and the difficulties of obtaining mechanisms to achieve long-term revenue sources as well. Next slide, please, Patricia. Yes, so with the aim to alleviate those issues, we would like to recommend for the New Zealand and Canadian governments to commit to co-designing capacity building and to articulate this commitment into respective UNDRIP implementation action plans. To investigate the expansion of Canada and New Zealand trade agreement to allow for trade in the climate strategy arbitrage, to promote and advance Indigenous equity ownership of new energy sources or infrastructure that will be used to address climate change. And for Canada specifically, we recommend implementing an Indigenous climate change secretariat. While for New Zealand, we recommend increasing the Māori representation on the Climate Change Commission. So yeah, that comes to an end of our presentation, and thank you so much for listening. If anyone has any questions, please ask away. My colleagues and I will be very happy to answer them. So yeah, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Wow, great job, group 2. That was amazing. I love your recommendations. And I admit in the first few weeks of the program, when you said that you were going to weave together climate strategy and UNDRIP, I just thought, oh my God, this is such a massive topic. Are they going to be able to do it? But I think you have, so well done. Raymond Cardinal, if he's still on the line, I think he had a really good question that he'd like to ask you. So Raymond, if you're still available, I encourage you to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for, I wasn't sure what the protocol was for these calls, and you know, I really enjoyed the presentation. I see that there's a lot of value in the work that you're all doing in this space, and you know, but really it's a question for me, how much of a comparative analysis you've done on this, because I think as Indigenous peoples, I'm Cree from Alberta and also Coast Salish from BC. And when I look at this issue, I think as Indigenous peoples, we can come to some common agreement on what UNDRIP means. But, you know, the question pops up in my mind, and it's the same for all of these topics. You know, when we look at the specific application in Canada or BC versus the US versus Australia versus New Zealand, the way it evolves or the way it gets dealt with at a national level can vary wildly. And so I'm just curious what sort of analysis or comparative, because I think that that's really the big stressor for me is making sure you understand the content, the national context, because they are very different. And you know, the easiest example, just, and I'll stop there. The easiest example for me is around emergency management, where in some countries, UNDRIP is part of this process. And because of that, and the recognition that original title flows and rests with Indigenous peoples, you see Indigenous people in Australia leading emergency management. You'll see them treated as equals in the US. You'll see some lesser involvement in New Zealand amongst the Maori, and in Canada, all we get is a commitment to having a dialogue. And so they're all based on UNDRIP, and they're all based on reconciliation, but the way it flourishes or doesn't flourish in the country really can come very, very dramatically. And I'm just wondering how you'd be looking at doing those analysis and understanding that the national application might be different. I hope that was clear. Thank you.
I can take that one. When I was doing my reporting and synthesizing the numbers in the reports, it actually states in a lot of them that there isn't enough investment into going down and finding what the comparative analysis is in these numbers. So originally when we were designing our presentation, we did talk a little bit about running the betas and talking a little bit more expressively in terms of financials and what it means for correlations between dollars invested and what gains and efficiencies we could have. So as with the rollout of strategies, sometimes I see that's where our inefficiencies are. And from a global management standpoint, it's kind of like how we roll out Euro Disney and the rest of them. There is the brand, and it's a global brand, say as we are Indigenous, and deployed at a regional level, it's executed just slightly different with the nuances. And we want to minimize some of the differences and not make it too much of a mess. Otherwise, sometimes those strategies don't work, as we see that we export some business models from the US and they just don't work in different areas because of the labor structure there. So we're always going to have, I guess, some of those inefficiencies, but I would like to highlight that there really isn't enough studies on out there. And I've been emailing people that have been publishing these reports, and there's not a lot of people getting back. I assume that, some of it's just COVID or, whatever else that goes on, but this just seems to be happening a lot here lately, but that work does need to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Leighton. Just mindful of time, we always run over. That's, I guess, just an INDIGI-X thing, but this is a really important subject to me because I see this as an opportunity for Indigenous people to play a real role in this new emerging industry. So thank you for asking that question, Raymond. And I think that this is something that if we were able to assemble a group of SMEs or Indigenous professionals that work in the industry to begin to kind of piece this out together, I think good things would come from it. So yeah, let me know if any of our non-delegates are on the call and would be interested in participating in that, and maybe we can work something out. So I'm mindful of time, and this happened in the very first final presentations for our first cohort as well. We didn't leave a lot of time for questions, but I'm gonna have to move us on, otherwise we will be here until the depths of the night. So let's move on to group 3. Group 3 is looking at funding mechanisms, which I think follows on nicely from our last presentation. So the title of their presentation is Nothing About Us Without Us, Indigenous Funding Mechanisms and Governance. And we have Natasha Brooks, Tipuratunga Jeffries, Georgina Ngevalu, Angela Pressel, and Scott Wikihoka. Go ahead, guys.
Kia ora, everybody. Firstly, just mihi to our elders, Joshua, who joined us today, and Bob and Dr. Ken for looking after us over these past 6 weeks. Thank you. To Raylene and Chris, well done on getting this idea, concept through to year 2, and I'm sure there'll be many more years to come. I just want to mihi also to my friend Eugene, who was a member of our alumni. I see he's gone back into his hui. But just acknowledge one of our respected Te Arawa leaders who we lost earlier this year, Edu George, who served on Eugene's board at Tarrant, and also their respective iwi Ngāti Kia, Ngāti Tuara. To My ropu to my group, my sisters from other parts of the world, from Canada, Angela Pressel, Tasha Brooks, from Fiji, Georgina, and from here in Aotearoa Te Puritanga, and myself, Scott Wikuhika. Our topic today is entitled Nothing About Us Without Us, Indigenous Funding Mechanisms and Governance. Angela's going to drive our slides. Over to you, Tasha.
Ait Squale, Antha Tasha Brooks, Tanitsanat Cowtson. I'm Tasha Brooks. I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of Cowichan tribes. I'm going to go over the vision. Indigenous peoples are empowered in the creation of mechanisms, delivery of funding, and governance of resources, which contribute to tangible outcomes in the development and well-being of our communities. And we recognize that implementation and achieving these visions will vary. Summary, there is a disconnect in the flow and distribution of funding from governments to Indigenous entrepreneurs. We need to indigenize the process. For too long, decisions have been made for us. Policies impacting Indigenous peoples and businesses are created and implemented without Indigenous input or guidance. This needs to change. Quality decision-making requires Indigenous peoples meaningful, involved, and joint decision makers. This relationship should be built on trust, respect, and understanding. Next slide. So I'll just go over the Canadian context. As part of economic development is Indigenous entrepreneurship. And so Indigenous self-employment has grown in Canada 99.5% between 2001 and 2016. Aboriginal financial institutions have played a major part in this growth, providing over $110 million annually. So despite this funding, financing is often cited as a major hurdle. The perceived availability of fragmented support opportunities may pose a problem, as 51% of Indigenous survey respondents identified obtaining and finding business supports as a barrier to business development. And 88% of self-employed First Nations people didn't take advantage of outside assistance for their business, and only 5.3% approached support from a government organization or Indigenous business support organization. Off to you, Angela.
OCM Tasha, Qualichas, Makwat, Aswell, Angela, Tau Squeed. In Halkamelam, the language of the Stalo peoples, I just said thank you, Tasha. Greetings, everyone, and good day. My name is Angela. I am an Indigenous professional of Lakamo First Nation, a community located in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia. Building off of Tasha's points, when I think of funding and Indigenous governance in Canada, I see an ongoing cycle that involves small communities being left behind, despite trying so hard to keep up. So let's use a small, mighty, and proud Indigenous community in BC as an example. Despite being seriously under capacity for reasons that we're all well aware of, the community tries to apply for federal funding to increase capacity and economic development. But because the application was rushed, perhaps unclear, and probably written by someone working 6 different jobs, the community was denied funding by the administration team, which is based in Ottawa, which is across the country. So the community doesn't receive funding and cannot improve capacity or economic development initiatives. And so the cycle continues. If we provide a balanced approach and the support that small communities deserve and increase Indigenous representation in decision-making, we can then unlock the economic potential of these small but mighty communities together and in partnership. OCM, thank you. I'll pass it to Scott.
Thanks, Angela. Look, to set the scene here in Aotearoa, I think it's vital that we understand the economic backdrop. This burgeoning Māori economic ecosystem that's not just surviving, but actually really thriving. Any description that you see of the Māori economy needs to go beyond just treaty settlements. Many Māori businesses, enterprises, organisations and trusts existed well before the beginning of the settlement processes here in Aotearoa, producing goods and delivering services. Most recently, the Māori economy has been put at $68.7 billion, up on the previously estimated 42.6. Of this total, nearly 21 billion resides within Māori trusts and corporations and tribal entities. Nevertheless, the assets of the businesses of just under 10,000 Māori employers continue to make up the bulk of that asset base. In 2018, this component totaled just over 39 billion, up from around 23 billion. Around 300,000 Māori now work in Aotearoa's workforce, with 74,000 of them in high-skilled jobs. Māori are a significant part of the current and future workforce of Aotearoa. Māori employers, entrepreneurs, and employees are in every industry and every sector, generating wealth and well-being. Despite these impressive figures and facts, however, many Māori have felt alienated and disadvantaged from the funding and resource management and allocation systems and structures that have been placed here for decades, and see that active participation and decision-making around funding and resource allocation in the 21st century as a way of correcting an imbalance and achieving equity. Next slide, please, Angela. Funding and resource allocation and management is becoming more and more complex. It requires participation at all levels. Decision-making around how and for whom funding is allocated requires effective participation between all key stakeholders. And it should be built on trust, respect and understanding. Decisions on funding for Māori enterprise and Māori kaupapa also sometimes require a consideration of the diverse perspectives of a funding request and the integration of different types of knowledge and worldviews. Now, the first step in this participation is to recognise Māori as a legitimate group or entity with which to engage, consult, to fund and to work. Now, legislation and the Treaty of Waitangi here in Aotearoa confer obligations and responsibilities that really are often misrepresented in practice. The reason Māori have often differentiated themselves from being just another part of a community or stakeholder is the unique part they play as an Indigenous culture here in Aotearoa. It has to be said that the driving force for any participation and collaboration should be the desire of all parties to respect, consult, learn from and understand each other. My understanding and experience is that when whānau, so Māori individuals, families, small businesses, organisations try to access resources available to them, it's just a huge rabbit hole to navigate. The criteria, the process, the timeframes, key contacts, they're always changing. The goalposts get shifted all the time. Often our whānau are volunteers with limited capacity. How are we enabling them to access these funds in a way that acknowledges this, makes it a user-friendly process? Now, to ensure that the needs of our people are being met in the right way, to change the narrative and to move towards equitable outcomes for our communities, there needs to be better partnership and transparency around why, what, and how we are supporting Indigenous development in Aotearoa. Over to you, Georgina in Fiji.
Thank you, Scott. Mbula vinaka and Noaya Maori from Fiji. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you. Fiji is home to diverse Indigenous communities that have their unique protocols and distinct dialect distinctions from each other. However, they share a common spoken language, which is the Itoke. In Fiji, we do have Fiji agencies that look after the Indigenous people, which is the Itoke Land and Fisheries Commission, Itoke Institute for Language and Culture, Itoke Land Trust Fund, and the Fiji Arts Council. Rutuma Otohelava, as you see before you in the slide, in English, it means Rutuma, my paradise home. This is where I am from. I am part of the minority group of 1.2 within Fiji. My island home is so remote that it will take you 3 days a boat ride or a 3-hour flight from Fiji. Administrated by the Rutuma Island Council that was established in 1927. I am thankful that in 2004, the Itoke Trust Fund Board was established, and its main objective is to foster the advancement of Indigenous Fijians and Rutumans by promoting initiatives that will better their standard of living and enhance appropriate cultural traditions and values. There are grant funds available in Fiji, but like my colleagues have shared, of how to access is very competitive and needs to be a lot of champions to increase this awareness and participation. I would like to support in any way I can to have a centralized access to the capital platform that is inclusive of minority indigenous, as I feel it is critical to help us develop the next generation of indigenous entrepreneurs within its first year of establishment. I am the co-owner and founder of the recently opened Rewanga Innovative Community Hub here in Fiji, where I have 3 Indigenous-owned startups that are being incubated on my premises. As small and remote as I am, I warmly welcome you to celebrate our centralized platform as an alumni and gladly host any future plans of virtual activities to strengthen and showcase our support for our growing network on our commitment as Indigenous people. Vinaka and Phoexia, all alone. Next slide, please.
Mauri ora ki a tātou, tēnei au ka mihi ki a tātou katoa, ko tatsui tēnei rā, ko ai tēnei, ko te Puritanga Jeffreys ahau. I just want to acknowledge all of the thanks that have been given. My name is Te Puritanga Jeffreys, and I will be talking to the recommendations. Nothing about us without us. In order to achieve equitable outcomes with Indigenous funding and mechanisms, we recommend the following. 1. Assess and adjust resourcing. We recommend a full assessment be undertaken by a third-party external reviewer of all funding pools and resources allocated across government that aims to support Indigenous entrepreneurs and enterprises. Key is the identification of overlaps, gaps, and inequitable distribution. Number 2, commit to increased participation. Given the outcomes of the report in Action 1, make adjustments to the systems and processes accordingly. As a foundation, we expect the values of participation, partnership, transparency, mutual trust, and equitable outcomes to be key in this process. Nothing about us without us. 3, create a centralized platform. This brings together recommendations 1 and 2. First we assess, then we adjust, and now we are tailoring it to best meet the needs of our audience. Establish a centralized user-friendly platform as a one-stop shop. Individuals can see all applicable information, understand how to apply and what the full process looks like and what it will involve. And lastly, designated support. We need someone dedicated to the vision and supporting the implementation and delivery. We have the tools with the centralized platform. Now we need to wrap support around users to translate government speak, to navigate through the information, and to undertake the application process, which will lead to successful applications and in turn, tangible outcomes with Indigenous communities. Next slide. And these are the references that we have used. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well done, group 3. I had to stop myself. I wanted to like pull a Tom Cruise and start jumping on my sofa. I'm so proud of you guys. And yeah, it's just, you raise such an important subject. And it's really, in a way, it's disappointing, but it's also encouraging to know that we all face the same issue with our own governments. And I think you offer some really tangible solutions to get around that. So I was so engaged in your presentation. I admit I haven't been following the chat. Maybe if anybody has a question for you guys, do you want to raise your hand or? I don't know, Chris, this is definitely your wheelhouse. I don't know if you have a question. Oh, go ahead, John.
No, I think Georgina came back to me and answered my question. But Georgina, yeah, I was curious. You said you had 3 startups and they're all self-funded. You had no support from your government for any of that. And
no.
That's incredible. Well done. Well done. And I can imagine the climate you working down there is quite difficult. So hats off to you. Well done.
Thank you. Basically, because COVID had happened, we had to close down our main business, which was usually retail. Then we realized that there were other businesses, and the 3 Indigenous startups that came on board, they just wanted to start as a startup. So we incubated them, and now they're running on premises.
Excellent. Well done.
Awesome. Well, we have a time for another question. Anybody else want to ask from our group 3?
I was expecting another hard question for Mr. Ray Cardinal. Letting me get off easy this time.
I think Ray's sister Cheryl is on the call as well. So I don't know, Cheryl, if you have a question you want to ask. So great to see everybody's families here. Oh, sorry guys. Another faux pas. I launched in to say something and I was on mute. Anyways, let's move on. I'm keen to keep to time. And we have one more group. Now, this will be a test of my rather failing IT skills, but we do have another video. Our group 4 was not able to all present at the same time, so they've recorded their presentation. Their topic is really meaningful to me personally, and it's one of the reasons why we created this program. And it acknowledges Indigenous leadership. So their title is Indigenous Leadership, Bridging the Gap. Group 4 consists of Linda Berg, Doug McCready, Sherry Mattis, Scott Mousseau, and Tamayo Stewart. I am going to share my screen and play the video. If you don't see it, or if there's no sound or no picture, please start waving your hands. Otherwise, it'll continue to play. Awesome. Okay, let's go for it.
Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Sherry Mattis. I come from the Muchet First Nation, located in the Untitled Territory, and I am coming to you from the Nanaimo Territory.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome to our INDIGI-X presentation about Indigenous leadership, bridging the gaps of Indigenous representation. My tribes are Ngaitahu and Te Waiponamu. Our team is comprised of Linda, Sherry, Scott, Doug, and myself, Tamayo. Our presentation today is all about Indigenous leadership. How can we have more Indigenous people in leadership positions that really help to grow our people? What are the main issues that are holding us back from achieving our goals? And how can we make sure that our people have the right support and foundations to get them to the next level of their careers? But most importantly, how do we solve this problem? And a quote from Murray Sinclair, education is what got us here and education is what will get us out.
Identification of the issues. Indigenous professionals in the mainstream senior level and leadership roles throughout corporations, governments, and boards need mentorship to enable them to be change makers. Furthermore, what requirements are there in order to be qualified for senior level roles? Breaking this down, the qualifications for these type of roles require a bachelor degree or even higher, with a preference for master's, professional certificate, designations, PhDs, or doctorates. The problem is twofold. Traditional qualifications and career paths do not generally include recognition, appreciation of the unique Indigenous approaches to relationships and strategies. multidimensional leadership and fusion models around conceptualization and intuitive reasoning. There has been some progress in these matters in New Zealand, but mostly confined to Indigenous organizations and Indigenous service roles. Although we are seeing new and recent examples of the enhanced Indigenous approach manifesting in the mainstream. Indigenous knowledge and pedagogy is valid and appropriate tool to use in all classrooms. Davidson and Davidson 2018 wrote, "For elders who keep our ancestors' knowledge alive through the dark times and the children who will use this knowledge to bring light to the world. We need this reminder that our ancestors fought to keep our traditional knowledge alive so that future generations could benefit."
With education and experience being such a large factor that contributes to our Indigenous people being unable to reach senior leadership positions, these are some stats that were taken from research done in both New Zealand and the First Nations. First of all, there needs to be a 100% increase in Indigenous role models acting as mentors in all sectors of the workforce. There are only 8% of Indigenous First Nations who have a bachelor's degree or higher, and a bachelor degree can give an additional 36% income, and postgraduate study can increase income by 52% in professional sectors. Our Indigenous rangatahi are physical learners. Hands-on education and practical work is the most effective way for us to learn. Indigenous communities are sometimes unable to fill the needs of their students because of a lack of funding, and there's an increased amount of Indigenous students, but a lot of them are the first ones in the family to go to university. So there's a large challenge for them there to navigate around this new space. This relates to the question, do we have enough support? Are our students going through university well equipped with the tools to graduate, and are they provided with the necessary social and mental support?
What is working? What has worked for Vancouver Island University's LAV program is mentorship, decolonizing practices, systems change, and the co-creation model. Once students do arrive, navigators provide individualized support to current students and those transitioning to work. Data also shows that LAV students who drop one or more courses more often, yet have slightly higher GPAs and slightly lower attrition rates than non-LAV students. What this seems to imply is that working with a navigator and carrying lighter loads leads to student persistence. During the year of learning, students also told us that when faculty take the time to get to know them better and their community and families and provide opportunities for them to shine and share their strengths, they feel valued, seen, and heard. What has not worked? In British Columbia, the K-12 system includes several components related to transitioning to high school graduates in the workforce, post-secondary, or trades. However, students continue to arrive at university unprepared. Communities and families indicate that they see a lack of university preparation at the K-12 system. In 2019, Indigenous and Northern Affairs dissolved the Indigenous Service Canada. This means that nations have more control over their post-secondary policies. This is exciting and moves us in the right direction. However, communities asserting that there is little capacity, expertise, or support at local levels for policy development. There are inconsistencies here between the values around collaboration, support, and relationships held by Indigenous Service Canada and the lack of support locally. As VIU works to implement the Indigenous commitment written into its academic plan, as well as recommendations from TRC, we see inconsistencies in terms of Indigenous staff and faculty in leadership positions on campus. The hiring of an Indigenous president and AVP of Student Affairs is a step in the right direction, but we also need to hear voices within our governance structures and informing curriculum development. The LAV Scholarship Program is outreach to the youth begins with mentorship and storytelling. Beginning in this way opens the hearts of youth, community, and families. Once hearts are open, a relationship can develop, and through this relationship, youth begin to see themselves as university students. Navigators step in and their stories and support students begin with a post-secondary journey. Together, we challenge the story of the typical university student because each student is individual and has a unique path. Briefly, the biggest teachings and that are coming forward are that students need to begin transitions process much earlier, and they need better preparation in terms of accessing resources, learning how to study, connect with community, finding campus supports, food security, and more. Incoming students also need better access to a safe, culturally appropriate housing. The other consideration is that many of our incoming learners are older and have different needs than younger incoming students, such as access to upgrading, family housing, flexible class times, and deadlines.
Indigenous leadership has 4 core components. Manaakitanga, which is hospitality, respect, and understanding. Whanaungatanga is having a sense of family and connections with the ones around you. Kaitiakitanga means guardianship and protection, especially for the environment. And Mātauratanga is having the necessary and professional knowledge and understanding. These 4 components are embedded into Māori culture and values called tikanga. If our Indigenous people have role models with these 4 core components, then our people will be on the right path to achieve their goals and become a better leader for their communities. Being an Indigenous Māori studying finance, there become less and less Māori in the room until I was almost the only one in sight. I found it challenging for me to see a future pathway in this field because I thought to myself, there are no other Māori here, Māori must not make it in finance. If it wasn't for the discipline and the values I was taught while I was growing up, I would not have finished university and be on the path that I am on today. I have landed not one but 2 amazing mentors, Chris Inslee and Peter Rice, who are keen to grow my knowledge, build on my weaknesses, and hammer down on my strengths. Mentors like these are what our Indigenous people need to succeed.
Being an Indigenous student at Vancouver Island University, I felt lost and alone in my MBA program. The moment I felt like I belonged was when I started as a mentor in the Community Cousins program. From that, I became a representative at the Students' Union as the Aboriginal student rep, and then moved on to become the chairperson. In all of this, I was able to also connect provincially with students across British Columbia as a provincial Indigenous student representative, and then on to the provincial treasurer. In all these roles, I learned to walk in 2 worlds. Here are our recommendations. Number 1, a pilot project of an organization of a paid internship program. Number 2, a task force to address student supports. Number 3, engagement with INDIGI-X alumni to implement recommendations. A pilot project for an organization of a paid internship program would provide opportunities for Indigenous professionals to work alongside other Indigenous and non-Indigenous professionals at the senior and executive levels throughout the corporations, governments, and boards. A task force will help to address the issues of student supports. Engagement with INDIGI-X alumni means that you are accessing executive knowledge from our past and present INDIGI-X participants. Thank you. Aichka, Kleko, Kleko. True.
Wow, group 4. So I have to admit something. I received your video last night at, I think it was 10:30 at night, and I watched it and I cried because it is just such an important subject and something that I experienced personally. And I just find your stories, Tamayo and Sherry, are just so powerful. You know, I myself, I'm the first from my family to go to university. I went into engineering, or I started in engineering at the age of 17, and I failed out. I was on the dean's list. I had a GPA of 1.7 out of 4, and I was about to be kicked out. And by some miraculous assistance, I then transferred into business and kind of became well on my way to have an international career. So like I too understand the challenges for Indigenous students and Indigenous leaders. So again, I was so engrossed in the presentation. I don't know if you want to follow up, Tamayo, or any of the other Group 4 members with any comments, but I'd also like to open it up to questions.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, first of all, on behalf of our team, we would just like to thank you, Raylene and Chris, for having this amazing opportunity, INDIGI-X. This opportunity allowed us as Indigenous people to come together and tackle real-world issues that we are facing and try our best to put our minds together, collaborate, and come up with these amazing projects. So thank you, guys. Our presentation was all about Indigenous leadership, and is a topic that really meant a lot to us, and we feel Indigenous leadership and having the right mentors are fundamental for us as a people to succeed. So kia ora, bula, and I hope you guys enjoyed our presentation. Our main recommendation that we're trying to hammer home is the importance of having a mentor or internship groups. And yeah, one of the examples of a great mentor for us is our guy, Chris Inslee. So I'm not only working for him, but he sees the importance of growing our young people. And every day there's something new for me to learn at the office. And the past 3 months that I've been with him has been just great. He has me thinking more about the environment, different ways we can offset our emissions, how we can create sustainable food, jobs and businesses, and many other things which the learning has just begun. If all of our young people can have a mentor that is dedicated to growing our people, it will help to get us not only into higher leadership positions, but in higher positions overall. In terms of university support, for Indigenous people, we like to be social, have a sense of family with the people around us. And that is something that helps us to feel welcome in a place like university. So having these social support groups there at university are really helpful for our people. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, just feel free. Cheers.
Well, I'd like to acknowledge Tamayo and the rest of Group 4. You guys are amazing leaders in your own right. So I'm mindful, we have gone over time, but I would like to allow for at least one question to Group 4. So does anybody on the call have any insights or would like any help to understand anything in terms of how we can facilitate Indigenous leaders? No, it was so powerful. Everybody's speechless.
I got one for you, Raylene.
Go ahead, John.
I think, I think everyone on the call is inspired by this. So call to action on my side to everyone on the call. Take someone under your wing. Look around you. Find a future leader or see a future leader and inspire them to do the same, and that'll grow. So my call to action on this. So great presentation, guys. I liked it.
Cindy, to your thing, how can this be made to small communities? Well, I feel a lot of us are already from small communities, being minorities almost as Indigenous people. We're already from these small communities, and if we can better ourselves, I'm sure we can go back to those small communities and help out the kids there. Going to say a speech at a primary school or high school or university or just anywhere in the community that you're involved with, I think it will be really powerful for our communities.
I also have a comment, and so I think that there's a lot of good frameworks out there. There's a lot of existing, like right now I'm part of the Indigenous Women's Leadership Initiative based out of Winnipeg. And so it would be nice to be able to put together some of those things that have existed that could assist in other areas. And we found also with our presentation, as we learned more of our Fijian and Maori cohort members, there was a lot of education and knowledge sharing. And so I think that part of those resources would be able to share, some of those humble beginnings and hope that there's some successes there.
Great point, Patricia. I just, one of the purposes of this program is to create a tent and to invite our community, our family, our elders, our youth into the tent to feed off of everybody's successes. So it's so great to see so many of our alumni joining us as well and supporting our new cohort. I've noticed Robert Beamish has his hand raised. So Rob, I don't know if you still have a question, but welcome back.
Thank you. I really like that presentation. I just wanted to comment that often a lot of the support for students can fall on the students in that when I went to university, it was Indigenous student organizations and associations where I got a lot of my support. And that was on the side of studies and co-op jobs and trying to just balance family, social life, and everything else. And it can be isolating, and not a lot of students know about that. And then for those students that are part of those associations, they just have to build off of their own knowledge and experience. And I think that connecting with other student associations from universities in New Zealand and Fiji and around Canada to learn what best practice have been and to get a larger sense of community and how what support looks like could be a really strong approach to just building that sense of community for students, because it often falls on the shoulders of those students to support their community members.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So yeah, I'm mindful of the time, but I do want to flag. So I personally have been invited to sit on Minister Chrystia Freeland's task force for feminist economic recovery. And the next thing that we're going to discuss next week is the topic of youth. So last night at 10:30, after I cried watching this presentation, I emailed the minister to say I would like to deliver an intervention during our next meeting in regards to youth and how we can specifically support in our Indigenous youth. So yeah, I'd really welcome to spend some time if Group 4 has, or anybody else on this call, to really begin to understand some pragmatic things that could potentially feature in the next budget that will support our Indigenous students turn into Indigenous professionals and Indigenous global leaders such as yourselves. So with that, it's a wrap, guys. We made it through despite our technical difficulties and the blazing heat coming through my windows. We've survived. I really want to extend my deepest gratitude to first of all, our elders, our second cohort, our supportive alumni, government, industry, community, family that is on the calls. It is such a great, I don't even have words to express how wonderful it is to see your support. And I truly think together we have created something incredible. And I think Akamemo, we still need to keep going, keep doing what we're doing. So with that, I was hoping Chris could say a few words, but he's had to slip out because he's a very busy co-founder. But with that, I would love to invite Dr. Kennedy, if he's still on the line, to help us close with a Karakia. And if he isn't, then maybe we'll move to Bob Silverthorne. Bob, you good?
Indeed. Well, number one, it's been such an honor to sit here and listen to people's great minds coming together, and it's hard to fathom almost the Wakutuin, the people of the Plains Sundance culture, come together as family. But people now of Fiji and of New Zealand Maoris, we now have new family around the world. Wasagam, ski all around this land. It's been really remarkable to have that, and I would ask that those challenges still keep forward. When I came to Musqueam from Rocky Boy, Montana, and my dad gave me many blessings and ceremonies to continue, and I've done that here today. I've kept the traditional learning fire going here with sweetgrass burning for each and every presenter, and as a group, their sharings. I came to Musqueam half a hundred years ago. Musqueam College is wonderful because it's still going. When I came here half a hundred years ago, there was one Aboriginal person in Alberta that had a university degree, one. And now we're so proud of our young people and the learning knowledge and the knowledge of Musqueam College sharing those skills, best language teachers you could have, and those kind of things. We started out I think a key element is really, I want to reinforce for you, is that we interviewed 97% of the household communities in Musqueam, their elders and family gatherings, and did it in a traditional way. We brought people together for a feast, and we asked, Kia wapamun, what do you see ahead? Wapamun, long way ahead. And the elders were amazing. They are as if they're sitting here with us now. The elders of that time looked ahead of what they wanted for post-secondary education. We knew that with one Aboriginal person with a certification degree, we had to go forward. So I think it's really important that we listen to the communities, and that's a really hard thing. As you get more educated, you want to gather that knowledge and go out and share it right away. And sometimes it's really difficult to listen. So I ask humbly that you listen. The second thing that I think is really important to share as we moved at this point, we now have obviously great minds and great opportunities and great thinking. Your minds are doing well, you're thinking ahead, but I'm going to give you one challenge. It's really, really vital to keep language, culture, and tradition. And I challenge each and every one of you, and I'm so impressed with the presentations made. I'm not belittling that in any way, but I challenge you to, as you seek those academic degrees behind your name and those letters, I challenge you to do the same culture, language, and understanding of your community and your group, your Wakuto and your family, and have those. I look forward to hearing each and every one, and Raylene has just been a remarkable one to continue those knowledge seeking, not only with degrees and opportunities to share to the community, but have the community very, as my dad Rainingbird said, he said, it's got to be in your head, but it's got to be mostly in your heart. And so I just give you that challenge before I send us off into this brave new world. The winds of change are here because Niskimpism, the March moon, when the geese return, is that bubbling of burst of learning and knowledge in the new spring. The winds of change are here, and I ask, and that's what I'm going to ask, is that each of you be the directors of that winds of change. You have the knowledge. I've given you the challenge to make sure you're strong culturally, linguistically, traditionally, and going out and serve that community. That last part of the mentorship is so important, to seek out some old buggers and you know, the grandmas and the kokums of your tribes and seek that knowledge. And you have to do that humbly. You have to come there and do that. And for us, just last week, had to take a herd buffalo bull for our Sundance coming in June, and it was with thoughts and prayers for each and every one in your presentations today and moving forward. So Kakio Wapa Moon, look ahead, keeping all that you carry and move forward. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'll share that. Anak tainan ay samanto gusa. Nanana skuntana notes. Our dear creator of all. We, the two-legged and the four-legged, the kakio kanusak, those that swim in the sea, those that fly in the air, and those that walk on the land, the two-legged and the four-legged. Give us the strengths, the knowledge, the understandings to carry forth. Wonderful that we were able to hear kakio wakutuana notes. We came together today as one family to share knowledge and traditions and culture and plans. You know, kakio, may all of us, may also walk that good road that the Creator has presented for us, and the opportunity to see the directions to take and make the winds blow and the directions to help each and every one. Aksanma, mina, kaupomten. That's all there is, and thank you so much.
Bob, I'm going to ask, because Dr. Kennedy had to shoot off, I'm going to ask Tumayo to offer closing Karakia for our group.
Cool. Me noi tātou. Kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou arakia au kraiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga taitanga ki te wairoa tapu. Ake, āmine.
Thanks, everybody. So yeah, that's it. We will be publishing a final report with all of the hard work of our groups in a month to 6 weeks. But in the meantime, reach out to our network via our website, join our mailing list, reach out to our delegates, connect on LinkedIn, and yeah, welcome to our family. We've created something really wonderful. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.